got a bunch of tracks for you guys to look at today. So start with the carnivores, because lots of people like to track carnivores. And we'll start with some cats. As I said in my other lecture, cats, of course, have 4 toes per foot. They tend to be much more asymmetrical and also round in outline than the dogs. So these are a couple cats. This is a leopard, Asian leopard. You can see the 4 toes. You can see the top of the pad here has 2 lobes instead of a single lobe, 3 lobes at the bottom. No claw marks, although as I said in lecture, that's not the best indicator. This is a lynx, North American lynx or Canada lynx. You can see, so the lynx is a vastly smaller animal than a leopard, but the tracks are not too dissimilar in size. And that's because the lynx is so specially adapted for living in snow that it has these incredibly big feet for its body size to act as snowshoes, basically. And this is my favorite track that I have. I bring plaster, so I make these with plaster of Paris, right? I bring a bag of plaster everywhere I go around the world. And then find a track and then pour plaster into it, come back the next day, pick it up and have this permanent record. This is my favorite because this is from really fine glacial silt in Alaska, and you can actually see the hairs, the halo of hairs all around the track. Bring it a little closer. So all the dark lines there are from the hairs. So lynx not only have big feet, they have really hairy feet for warmth. Okay, so lynx, leopard, all cat tracks look basically the same, just different sized. So this is a tiger. And this one looks weird, looks like it has more toes than it should because this is part of the front foot here, and then this is the back foot here with the main pad and then the 4 toes. Okay, so those are the cats. Then we've got a couple of civets actually from Asia. So this is a small civet here, 2 tracks. There's the front and the back with 4 toes on each foot. It looks very cat-like. Remember that the civets are in the Feliformia lineage, so they're very cat-like, but they do have little claws. They show more claw than a cat would. And this is the larger civet, large Indian civet. You can see this is a super cat-like track in the asymmetry and in the 2 lobes at the top of the pad here. But the front foot, which is here, is so much bigger than the back foot, which you wouldn't really see on cats that much. And also, again, it's showing more claw marks. Okay, then we've got, I guess, still sticking within the feliform lineage, got the hyena family. So hyenas have some really interesting tracks where they look cat-like. These are both from a spotted hyena. They look cat-like in that they're super asymmetrical, right? That asymmetry is characteristic of cat tracks. But they're also really scrunched. The toes are all scrunched together and scrunched right up against the pad like that, which is characteristic of hyenas. All right, then moving on to the dogs, the family Canidae. Dog tracks tend to all look kind of similar as well. This is kind of a classic one. These are wolf tracks, also from Alaska. This is the front foot and the back foot. The front foot's bigger. You can see the claw marks, which you don't see as much in cat tracks. You see the 1 lobe at the top of the pad versus 2 lobes at the bottom instead of 3. So this is also from Alaska, but it's much coarser silt than that lynx track I showed you. So this one, you can't see as much detail, but you can see some other interesting things about the track, which are these pressure ridges. So when the animal steps into the mud, it's pushing the mud out to either side, and it makes little pressure, well, in this case it'd be pressure valleys, because this is the negative impression. But okay, so that's a wolf. And then very similar in shape and structure, but not in size. This is an Asian wild dog, the dhole. And so it's got the same thing, 1 lobe at the top of the pad showing claw marks. It's much more of an oval-shaped track than the cats would be. You can tell here by that divot that if this was, you know, the negative image of that, that would be a dome. There's to be this dome in the middle of the track instead of on cats you have the ridge, the arc kind of running across the top of the pad. And then this is a much smaller dog. This is from a little kit fox in the desert southwest of the US in some really fine mud. This one's showing a direct register like cats do often. So this is two tracks right on top of each other, a front foot and then a back foot right on top. The feet are about the same size, so you can just barely see the outline of what would have been the front foot. But very, very minimal claw marks, if any. So this is, you know, another reason why claw marks can be useful, but it's definitely not the only go-to you should use for distinguishing cat versus dog tracks. But before I put it down, the oval, do note that oval shape. This is a super oval-shaped track that you would never see in a cat. Right? Okay, so then those are our prominent North American four-toed carnivore tracks. Then we've got weasels, the weasel family, which has 5 toes. And so this is a marten, an American marten track. 2 tracks, actually. This is the lower one, and this is a separate track here. These are some bird tracks on the side, incidentally. But the weasel tracks, we're looking for a couple things. In the track itself, we're looking for a curved pad. So see how the pad here, the metacarpal pad, is an arc shape rather than a big, much bigger structure like you'd see in a cat or a dog. And then the other thing is that we have 5 toes arranged in a 1-3-1 pattern. So you've got 1 toe out here, 3 close together in the middle, and then 1 on the outside. So that's the marten. This is another of my favorite tracks. This is a wolverine. Let me hold it up for comparison with the wolf. These can be, sometimes people confuse them with wolf tracks just based on size and the fact that you see big claws. But they're different in a couple of ways. The most important one, I think, is that the pad is arc-shaped, again, like all weasels, and not like any dogs. Whereas, and then of course the other thing is that they have 5 toes. So you can see, not as clearly as with the marten, but it still has that 1-3-1 toe pattern. This one, incidentally, one of the cool things about doing this kind of plaster casting is that when I saw this track on the ground, I knew immediately it was a wolverine because of that arced pad, but I could only see 4 toes. It wasn't until I actually poured the plaster and then pulled the plaster up and cleaned it and looked at it that the impression of that 5th fainter toe came through. So that's one of the fun things about casting. Okay, so moving on then, all the animals we've talked about so far, all the tracks have been digitigrade, right? We also have some animals that are plantigrade, although, as I just said in lecture, when we say plantigrade, we usually mean on the back foot. The front foot is usually still digitigrade. So this is, well, let's start with the bears. The bears are the most famous example. These are grizzly bear tracks, also from Alaska. This is the back foot here. You know, classic, I mean, unmistakable, right? The only thing that could be mistaken for is a person running around in like barefoot pajamas. It's got the claw marks, it's got the 5 toes, and then it's got this foot-shaped pattern, very plantigrade, right? This heel bit here is what makes it plantigrade. In contrast, the front foot is digitigrade, like a dog track. So you've got the metacarpal pad, and you've got the 5 toes, but you don't have a heel behind it. And then you've got the claws, the claw marks on the grizzly bear are quite a bit out in front of the toes, as opposed to a black bear where they're closer. And then the other kind of famous plantigrade animal we have around here is the raccoon. So these are raccoon tracks. Remember, when you find 2 tracks together, you're usually going to see the front foot in back of the back foot because it's moving forward. So this is the front foot, digitigrade. It's got a curved metacarpal pad. And the back foot is more plantigrade. You can see part of that heel coming down here. All right, so those are the carnivores I brought in. And then I wanted to show you a couple herbivores as well. We'll start with some of these rodents because they don't necessarily look as much like the other herbivores as they do like carnivores. This is a weird one. You know, it looks like an alien footprint. But this is the front foot here, and then the much larger back foot of a beaver. So it's showing, you know, weird toe pattern, and then you can see the webbing. The back, both feet, but particularly the back feet, are highly webbed. So you can actually see the webbing in this track of the beaver that it's using for propulsion through the water. I unfortunately forgot to bring in, I have in my office, but I forgot to grab it this morning, a track of a North American porcupine. Anyway, Google that, they're very cool, and they're totally different from this, which is the track of an Asian porcupine. So this is a Southeast Asian porcupine with tracks that almost look more carnivore-like than they do like certainly like a North American porcupine, but it's got, you know, metacarpal pad here. It's got 5 toes, although only 4 of them show up really well. It's got claws, you know. So some people in Asia have gone tracking with people and they mistake these for carnivore tracks. Okay, and then last are the ungulates. So ungulate tracks are very distinctive, and it's actually, even in North America, it's pretty easy, fairly easy to tell them apart species by species. Well, you can never tell a mule deer from a white-tailed deer. I would say if people tell you they can, don't believe them. But you can tell things like an elk from a moose pretty clearly. They all have the classic, you know, 2 toes, right? These are ungula grade creatures. They're walking on the tips of their toes. This is a bighorn sheep from Yellowstone. Bighorn sheep are cool. You know, it's not a great track, but you can see the 2 toes pretty clearly, the 2 hooves. Bighorn sheep are cool because they have a very hard outer rim to their hooves, and then it's softer in the middle, and they use that for grip. They use that for grip on their the super rocky terrain they live in. So that's bighorn sheep. This is a Southeast Asian muntjac. You know, it's a much smaller little deer, about the size of a goat, like a small goat. But the same, it's an even-toed ungulate. It's got 2 toes right there. I even, again, another one I forgot to bring in is I have a mouse deer. Remember we talked about mouse deer in class. They're not deer, they're in their own family, but they're about the size of a cat. They're even-toed ungulates the size of a cat. And they have little tiny hoof prints, like less than a centimeter long. They're really cool. Okay, and then the last even-toed ungulate I have is this one, which is from a gaur. So this is a huge wild cow, the biggest wild cow in the world. Just 2 big hooves, you know, same basic deal as the smaller even-toed ungulates, just on a bigger scale. And then, while we're talking about ungulates, I've got this one. You look at this one, you think, the heck's up with that? It's got something big. It's, you know, granted, it's not a great track. The substrate wasn't great, but it's got this big pad here, and it's got 1, 2, 3 big toes. So this, of course, is an odd-toed ungulate. So, you know, not a horse, which only has 1 toe, but this is a tapir. This is a Central American tapir with 3 big toes. And incidentally, a rhino track, this is the only tapir track I've ever seen, and I cast it, but I've done a lot of rhino tracking, and rhino tracks look not very dissimilar from that. A little bit bigger, a little bit beefier, but pretty much the same deal. All right, so have fun looking at these.